a loving father of two.
Era muy buen padre, la verdad.
He was extremely hardworking, very likable, very personable.
Is ruthlessly killed outside his home.
There was numerous gunshot wounds to his upper torso.
Whoever shot the victim was extremely angry and was sending a message.
Detectives hunt a cold-blooded murderer.
We identified the weapon as an AK-47.
We received a text message that said, "Nobody messes with me."
People were fearing for their lives because the killer was still out there.
The question starts to creep in of, is this one that may never be solved?
Then, one phone call changes everything.
He said that he was in fear for his life, for what he was going to tell us.
We thought, wow, this is the first break that we've had.
Exposing a killer no one saw coming.
It hit you in the gut. It was somebody that you just never really would have expected.
Le quitó un padre y a mí la mitad de mi corazón.
Come out here to go skiing, snowboarding, and in the summer months, it's hiking, bicycling, fishing.
It's beautiful, the weather's always sunny. There's always an outdoor aspect that is just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
One early fall morning in 2016 turns into a nightmare for the town of Mammoth.
Mammoth Lakes Police Department received a 911 call at approximately 1:50 in the morning, reporting just hearing a series of rapid gunfire and that a neighbor across the street had been shot.
Police and first responders race to the scene.
Patrol officers found the victim lying in the driveway, and he was lying face down in his own blood.
You had an individual who'd been shot multiple times and the victim's wife standing there, and she's hysterical.
Y yo quise abrazar a Omar, me acuerdo. Y alguien dijo, no lo toques, no lo toques. Yo le dije, pero ¿y por qué no? Si es mi esposo. Quiero saber que él esté bien.
Paramedics arrive and try to resuscitate the victim.
La ambulancia llegó rápido, pero como Omar recibió muchos disparos en el cuerpo, Omar ya había muerto cuando ellos llegaron.
Police learn the victim is 35-year-old Omar Hernandez, and a homicide investigation is launched.
When I arrived on scene, I've never seen anything like that. Omar had approximately 15 gunshot wounds to his body.
There were bullet impact marks all over. In total, there was 30 shell casings that were found.
The victim was laying alongside his vehicle. There was numerous gunshot wounds to his upper torso. His vehicle was still running, coffee cup still laying there, all indications that he was getting ready to go somewhere.
What was also noticed was there were divots that were in the asphalt and in the driveway.
We definitely got the feeling that as the victim laid there, he was continuously being shot.
I felt like it was extremely personal. Whoever shot the victim was extremely angry and was sending a message.
The shell casings provide another surprising but valuable clue.
The caliber of the bullet that was used, that only comes from a high-powered assault rifle.
It was a 7.6 millimeter round, so we believed it had to be an AK-47. To have a weapon of that sort here in Mammoth, I thought was extremely unusual because those are assault weapons. Those are not hunting rifles.
We thought it was potentially gang-related, possibly some sort of hit that somebody definitely wanted to get the job done.
Could this have been a planned execution? Detectives try to speak with Omar's wife, Gladys.
Gladys was hysterical, extremely upset, unable to talk, and she was screaming.
Estaba devastada por mi dolor, devastada por el dolor de saber que Omar había muerto. Y estaba, pues, perdida porque decía, ¿por qué? ¿Por qué le hicieron esto a Omar?
Born in 1980, Omar was raised by a single mother in Guadalajara, Mexico, but knew his destiny lay elsewhere.
El sueño de Omar era exacto, venir a Estados Unidos, porque sabía que aquí había más oportunidades. Su visión era crecer, salir adelante y sacar adelante a su mamá.
When Omar was 18 years old, he headed to Mammoth on the advice of a friend, and for 8 years had been successfully working his way up at the same company.
Omar had a good job here in Mammoth. He was a supervisor at the Vaughn's grocery store, which is the main grocery store in Mammoth Lakes.
He was extremely hardworking, very likable, very personable.
At work, Omar was known to be a kind and caring, almost big brother figure to a lot of the employees that he supervised. He took them under his wing and really tried to help them feel like they belonged.
In 2006, Omar met Gladys Gastelum, and romance quickly blossomed.
Lo conocí y amor a primera vista. Sentí que era una gran persona, un hombre increíble.
Omar and Gladys started a family, welcoming the arrival of 2 sons.
Omar, como padre, era fantástico. Era muy buen padre, la verdad.
The young family had a bright future, starting with an event planned for just days after Omar's murder.
Venía toda mi familia de México. Íbamos a bautizar a Mateo. Yo estaba emocionada por el bautizo de mi hijo y porque venía toda mi familia.
Instead of a celebration, Omar's loved ones must now organize a funeral. Looking for answers, detectives questioned Gladys about the hours leading up to the shooting.
She had gone to visit a family member, and Omar stayed home, and she came home right around 10 or 10:30 p.m. that night, and Omar was sleeping.
He was trying to get a good night's sleep before the night shift.
According to Gladys, at approximately 1:30 in the morning, Omar had gotten up, made himself some coffee, and went outside to start the car, to warm it up.
Omar siempre entraba a despedirse y me dio un beso y me dijo, te amo.
And then shortly after he exited the back door to go to work, she heard the loud gunfire that made her jump up.
Se escucha una ráfaga de muchos disparos y yo me paro asustada. Yo nada más pedí a Dios que no fueran para Omar, que cuidara a Omar porque iba saliendo de mi casa.
So she got dressed really quick, ran outside, and that's when she saw Omar lying face down in the driveway.
Y empiezo a gritar ayuda, por ayuda. Y le dije al vecino, llama al 911, porque Omar no está bien, algo le hicieron a Omar. Le dije, le dispararon a Omar.
When police ask if anyone held a grudge against Omar, Gladys's response is immediate.
The name of Saul Morales came up. Saul Morales had a problem with Omar because Saul had always accused Omar of having an extramarital affair with his wife, Rosalinda, who was also an employee at the Vaughn's supermarket.
About a year or so before the murder occurred, investigators learned that Saul had actually gone to Omar and Gladys's home, trying to confront Omar over whether these affair rumors were true.
There were disputes between Omar and Saul.
Gladys tells investigators that Saul's behavior had been disturbing.
Saul had confronted her, told her that my wife is having an affair with your husband.
She noticed that he had been driving by the house on a regular basis.
Gladys says she had seen Saul drive by her house as recently as just 3 days before Omar was killed. Things became so bad, Gladys tells police that Omar filed a restraining order against Saul.
That was an attempt for Omar to get Saul to stop coming to his house, stop contacting his wife.
Could Saul's jealous rage have driven him to murder?
Gladys indicated that she was afraid of Saul, and she thought maybe he was so upset over this alleged affair that he possibly could have killed Omar.
And so Saul became a person of interest pretty quickly. At that moment, we felt like, okay, maybe this is the guy.
Coming up, investigators uncover a menacing grudge.
He hated Omar,
He was there to teach Omar a lesson.
not his motive to murder somebody.
And shocking clues.
The sedan pulled over near where the crime scene occurred.
It was the same vehicle that we'd seen in the video surveillance.
The shell casings recovered were fired from the same gun.
Before a surprise confession reveals a cold-blooded killer.
He described how he just continued to shoot.
Nunca imaginé que él hubiera hecho algo tan desgarrador, algo tan triste.
That was alarming. I knew right then it was huge.
Hernandez was gunned down in his own driveway. His wife Gladys has pointed police towards a possible killer.
Saul Morales was the first suspect in this case because his wife, Rosalinda, had reportedly been having an affair with Omar.
We found out that Saul confronted Omar about the affair.
Saul told Omar to leave his wife alone.
Omar was upset that Saul had come over to his house while his kids were home.
There was a fight that broke out between them and police were called.
Officers arrived on scene and they were separated. No charges were filed, but there still was a documented incident. Gladys did not believe that Omar really did have an affair with Rosalinda. But the important thing was if Saul believed it to be true, then that is motive to murder somebody.
Needing more information about the alleged affair, investigators head to Omar's workplace.
The coworkers described Omar as a nice guy who got along with everybody.
The manager described Omar as a very hardworking person dedicated to the job, was that employee that worked over and beyond what was required of him.
The manager did tell me that he had heard the rumors about Rosalinda and Omar's extramarital relationship. And also, he did bring up the fact that at times he would see Saul in Vaughn's walking through the aisles as though he wanted to catch Omar and Rosalinda together.
Learning Saul's wife, Rosalinda, happens to be working her shift at the store, detectives pull her aside for an interview.
She was very, very emotional.
Rosalinda found out about the murder when she came in to work and became very upset.
Investigators confront Rosalinda about the rumors.
Rosalinda denied that there was ever an affair or that there was any sexual relations between her and Omar.
She said that her and Omar's relationship was purely platonic and that her and him had been best friends, and that's the extent of their relationship.
Rosalinda definitely gave me the sense that she was nervous.
In talking to Rosalinda, she appeared to be holding back.
At this point, investigators weren't sure whether the affair was a rumor or whether it was true.
It seemed like the jealousy involved in the case could have been enough for murder. When you see a murder that gruesome, with that many bullets and that much violence, it comes out of some strong emotion.
Police know that even if Saul had motive for murder, he also needed the opportunity.
We asked Rosalinda where Saul was the previous night, and Rosalinda said that Saul was in bed with her the whole night, and then she ended up getting up for work around 3 that morning, and he was still in bed.
I wouldn't say that that particular alibi was rock solid, so interviewing him was very important, just to find out if their stories matched.
Investigators bring Saul down to the station.
When I interviewed Saul, he was extremely calm, extremely courteous, and extremely cooperative.
He was very forthcoming about the altercations that had occurred with Omar in the past, and that he was afraid that Omar had had an affair with his wife.
Investigators ask Saul to account for his movements in the hours leading up to the murder.
Saul claimed that he had gone to visit his uncle, and he was with his uncle throughout the night before coming home, and went to bed right around 11 o'clock that evening.
He said that he was asleep in his bed on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with it. He voluntarily provided a DNA reference sample to exclude him.
Getting DNA from Saul was extremely important because he was a prime suspect in the shooting, and because with fingerprints coming off the bullet casings, you could match the DNA.
Saul also allows detectives to search his home.
I searched the house for weapons, ammunition, or any evidence that could tie him to the crime. But I never found anything that would lead me to believe he had weapons or ammunition in the house.
When the results come in, Saul's DNA does not match the DNA found on the spent shell casings.
His story seemed to be making sense. It seemed to be consistent. There was no indicators that he was lying to us.
And so we didn't have anything to really move on.
I didn't find him to be suspicious. He just wasn't connecting the dots for me. And from my training and experience, he did not give me any indication that he was involved in the shooting. And so that was really frustrating.
With detectives forced to put Saul on the back burner, they revisit the theory that Omar's murder could have been a professional hit.
The weapon used, the AK-47, it's a weapon of murder, a weapon of violence. And so the nature of that weapon alone made people think this has something to do with a gang.
Because of the brutal nature of the crime, something we were looking at, is this the cartel? Is this a paid hit? It's gotta be big because of the way it was done.
His home in Mammoth Lakes, California, now suspect he might have been targeted by a criminal gang.
There was speculation that maybe this was a drug deal that went bad and the cartel had come up and put a hit on Omar. Investigators went looking through Omar's background to see if there was any drug affiliations or anything that could have been tied to organized crime.
I didn't find anything in Omar's background that would indicate he had any gang association whatsoever.
No pertenecía a pandillas, él era una persona tranquila, no usaba drogas, no usaba nada.
Investigators move on from the gangland hit theory. Several days later, they discover their security camera footage from a building near Omar's home and hope the video will provide new leads.
The closest camera that had any video surveillance was several hundred yards down the street, so you were capturing vehicles coming and going.
Unfortunately, there were no cameras that were able to actually capture the crime as it occurred.
What the security footage documented was a vehicle circling the area several times prior to the shooting.
We had what we believed was a light-colored four-door sedan. We felt pretty confident that it was a Toyota Camry or Toyota Corolla. We felt like that vehicle possibly was involved.
Police spot another suspicious vehicle in the footage.
There was a red sedan-type vehicle that was seen at the intersection, driving down towards the victim residence.
What was notable was it appeared less than 2 minutes prior to when the murder took place, and then the sedan pulled over near where the crime scene occurred.
Unfortunately, with the low image quality, we weren't able to identify who was in the suspect vehicles.
Undeterred, police show the footage to Omar's wife, hoping she can identify the vehicles. The red sedan provokes a strong reaction.
Gladys said that the day after the shooting, a red sedan drove by with two people inside of it that she recognized as Vaughn's employees. She did say that they gave her a slow roll type of look, as though letting her know they were watching her, or maybe even they were involved.
Sentí miedo en ese momento porque cuando ellos pasan manejando y luego le hacen así, yo sentí mucho temor, sentí miedo.
Gladys told investigators that the two individuals in the car were Jose Antonio Correas Vasquez and Eliud Correas Vasquez. They were cousins. Gladys knew Eliud and Jose Antonio as co-workers of Omar's.
At the time, their reputation was that they were MS-13 gang members from El Salvador.
Detectives head to Vaughn's to talk with Jose Antonio and Eliud's co-workers.
Employees did tell me that Omar was the supervisor for the Salvadorians, and it appeared that they didn't like Omar, they didn't like taking orders from him.
Investigators learn that Omar had been promoted to a management position a few months before his murder, and that there was constant friction between him and Eliud.
Eliud and Omar did not get along. In fact, there had actually been an incident between the two of them where Eliud had been sent home for not doing his job properly.
Eliud became so upset that he contacted the union and made a formal complaint against Omar.
Did Eliud take matters into his own hands with deadly consequences? There's one more detail about him that raises suspicions.
Eliud drove a red sedan, and it seemed to be a possible match to the car that was on the surveillance video. However, when we looked closer at the red sedan and Eliud's red sedan, it was clear immediately that they did not match, and that was not Eliud's car in that surveillance video.
With Eliud looking less likely as the killer, investigators turn their focus to his cousin, Jose Antonio.
He claimed to have some association to some gangs. We subsequently served a search warrant at his residence. We did find assault weapons, although they ended up being imitation airsoft type weapons. So obviously they weren't involved in the actual murder itself.
We didn't find any definitive ties to Salvadorian gangs. I think it was just their bravado, and they had a heavy reputation, and they knew people were afraid of them.
Without anything concrete linking Jose Antonio or Eliud to Omar's death, detectives are forced to move on.
That was just super frustrating. It just seemed like at every corner there was something that we thought was going to really point us in the right direction and really break the case open for us, and it just was another dead end.
Just as the case threatens to hit a wall, investigators scouring Omar's cell phone activity make a jaw-dropping discovery.
In combing through thousands and thousands of text messages, we did find many text messages where he and Rosalinda spoke to each other, and it became very clear that the rumors of the affair were definitely true. It also became apparent that not only was there an affair with Rosalinda, but that Gladys knew about the affair.
That was a cause for concern because initially the affair was denied by all parties at first when the investigation began.
The texts force investigators to rethink everything. Why did Gladys and Rosalinda lie? Were either of them trying to cover up for a crime? And had Saul learned the truth and done the unthinkable?
There was a lot of evidence that showed that there were enough emotional ties involved in that somebody could be angry enough to kill someone based off of that infidelity.
2. Omar Hernandez was brutally gunned down. Detectives have just obtained proof a rumored affair between Omar and coworker Rosalinda did actually take place.
Omar was involved romantically with Rosalinda, and through cell phone forensics, we located text messages that definitely confirmed that Omar had a conversation with Gladys as well about the affair that confirmed that she knew about it.
Gladys had previously told police there was nothing to the rumored affair, so investigators had to speak to her again.
When we asked Gladys about the affair, she broke down crying, and she confirmed the rumors to be true.
Gladys described how she found out about the affair with Rosalinda back in 2014. She had returned home early from a trip to Mexico, and when she came back to their house, Omar wasn't there, but there was burned wax and rose petals on the bed, on the floor around it, and she knew they weren't for her. So a couple days after, she ended up going through her husband's phone and found the text messages between Omar and Rosalinda, which confirmed to her that he had had an affair.
Detectives asked Gladys why she lied to them before. What was she trying to hide?
Her reasoning behind lying about the affair was simply to protect Omar's reputation. He had a good reputation, and she wanted to maintain that. And also, according to Gladys, they were working through their problems to keep their family together.
She just didn't want to have anything negative to say about her husband. He'd been brutally murdered. She kind of wanted to leave it at that. Let's investigate and try to figure out the person responsible.
Police are also curious why Rosalinda had been untruthful and bring her into the station.
And told her we knew that she did have an affair with Omar. She told us that she lied because she was embarrassed about it, but also that she didn't want to inflame things with Saul.
We asked her whether he knew about the affair or not. She confirmed that he did know about it. She was definitely concerned about her husband.
I asked her flat out if she believed that Saul may have killed Omar, and her answer to my question was, I don't believe he pulled the trigger. So of course that was alarming. I thought maybe I missed something at the beginning and that there was a potential that Saul may have actually even hired someone to kill Omar. It presents difficulty because then you have to backtrack and look at the initial suspect once again and make sure you haven't overlooked anything.
Investigators re-look at Saul, but after combing through phone records and text, find no evidence he hired anyone to kill Omar or that he committed the crime himself.
At this point, the evidence did not bear fruit that Saul was the suspect we were looking for. His alibi checked out. There was nothing else that ever came up that pointed him as being the one who did this.
Saul is cleared once again. With yet another busted lead and no arrest in sight, police have to contend with the fear that's gripping Mammoth Lakes.
It was pretty hard for the community to have all these investigations going on and talk of murder and gossip of violence and the things that led to it, but no answers, just dead ends. I think people genuinely were fearing for their lives because the killer was still out there.
Afectó a la comunidad porque todos vivían en pánico, porque todos se preguntaban por qué pasó esto, por qué en un pueblo tan chico, donde nunca había pasado nada así. No había explicación y pienso que la gente sí tuvo miedo.
Despite months of tireless work, investigators run out of leads.
The case essentially went cold. There was nothing to indicate any one person was responsible.
At this point, we're well over a year into the investigation, and the question starts to creep in of, is this one that may never be solved? It starts to weigh on you because we've formed relationships with Gladys and we want nothing more than to bring justice for her family.
It definitely wears on you as an investigator. You constantly ask yourself, what did I miss? There's got to be something there that I missed.
Fue uno de los puntos más difíciles para mí también. Pero siempre tuve fe de que algún día, dije, así pasen años, se va a solucionar porque no puede quedar la muerte de Omar impune. De esa manera como él murió, no puede quedar así.
We had always been feeling that if we could just get that one piece of information that could lead us to the suspect, we'll develop the rest. But we needed somebody to come forward and give us a break that we needed to solve that case.
2.5 years later, detectives receive just that. An explosive phone call that upends the whole case.
In June 2019, a person called and said that they know who killed Omar and has some concerns for their own safety.
In my mind, I felt that that's the big break that we needed. Sometimes that's all it is, one person with information. I knew right then.
Information that blows the case wide open.
A man by the name of Francisco Ramirez came into our office, and you could tell that something was scaring him. He said that he was in fear for his life, for what he was going to tell us. Francisco started telling us about this individual. His name was Josue Correas Vasquez, and he was a co-worker at Vaughn's. They both worked the night shift.
Francisco worked with Josue, and Josue was actually the brother to Eliud, and he describes this contentious relationship between Omar and Eliud and Josue. Months before the murder, says that they were constantly butting heads with one another, described Eliud and Josue as constantly disrespecting Omar. Omar would delegate tasks that need to be completed, and Eliud and Josue would always be disrespectful and say, well, why do we got to do that? Nah, I don't think so. Was just constantly kind of challenging him.
Josue had actually told Francisco that he hated Omar because he had been disrespected and that he had threatened to fire his whole family, and that he had to take matters into his own hands. Then, just several hours after the murder had occurred, Francisco told us that he received a text message from Josue, and it said something to the effect of, "See, I'm not playing around." And then there was another text message that said, "Nobody messes with me."
When he saw the text message, he felt very strongly that that is Josue's way of telling him he just murdered Omar.
Francisco then divulges another disturbing piece of information.
Francisco told us that he had actually gone shooting with Josue months prior to the murder. They had gone out in the middle of the forest, and that Josue had brought an AK-47 with him and were just shooting targets. When Francisco mentioned AK-47, obviously all of our ears perked up, as that's the weapon we were looking for.
And then several years after Omar was murdered, Francisco became the manager to take Omar's place at Vaughn's. And he's now in a position to where he needs to delegate, and he's now seeing the same disrespectful tone from Josue. At some point in time, he and Josue got into an argument, and Josue says something to the effect of, "Don't make me do to you what I did to Omar."
We asked Francisco why he is now just coming forward 2.5 years after the murder. And Francisco said that he was scared of Josue.
He was concerned for his safety, and he wanted to tell law enforcement about what he knew, because he said, if something is to happen to me, I want you guys to know who's responsible.
Francisco realized, I could be the one that's next, and this guy needs to be stopped.
Detectives contact Gladys to gather more information about the working relationship between Omar and Josue.
Gladys did tell us that when Josue first came to the States, he didn't have a lot of friends, he didn't know very many people, and Omar had taken Josue under his wing.
Omar was kind to him, would bring him food for lunch breaks, really seemed to keep an eye on Josue and care about his well-being.
Siempre le ponía su lunch para que él comiera en Bonds y siempre me decía, oye Gladys, échale más lunch para convivir, para darle a Josue.
Omar and Josue seemed to get along for many months during that time period. But Gladys told us that once Omar was promoted to supervisor, things started to change between Omar and Josue.
Cuando a Omar le dan el puesto, sí sentía que algo había cambiado. La misma relación de amistad ya no era igual.
Omar had a job to do. And as Omar started giving more direction and instructions to Josue, Josue started to be a bit more belligerent towards him, talking back, refusing to do certain things.
There had been reported conflicts between the two, and that Josue had felt like Omar was on a power trip.
They didn't get along at work. They were constantly arguing with one another.
Could a workplace conflict have turned into murder? Investigators pull the employee timesheets for the night Omar was killed.
We went back through the Vaughn's records from that night to see when people clocked in, and we noticed that Josue did not work at all that night. We also looked into what vehicle does Josue drive.
Detectives are hopeful that Josue's car will be a match to one of the two vehicles spotted in the surveillance footage.
We determined that at the time of the murder in 2016, he did in fact own a 2012 silver Toyota Camry. That vehicle, shortly after the murder, had been resold to another individual. So we ended up finding that vehicle down in another part of California, and it was the same vehicle that we'd seen in the video surveillance.
It matched the color and the make and model of what we were looking for.
At that moment, we felt that we had the person responsible for the murder of Omar.
Needing hard evidence to tie Josue to the murder, detectives head to the area where Francisco had witnessed him firing an AK-47.
It wasn't a designated shooting range. It was a dirt road off of a main highway.
We went out to the range where he said that he shot with Josue, and we were actually able to recover 56 cartridges that were just below the dirt. All of these cartridges were extremely important because as we grabbed the first cartridge we saw. It had the same head stamp of the cartridges found at the murder scene. When we found shell casings, it just really hit you in the gut.
We thought, wow, this is...
Hope they finally got a break after discovering spent bullet casings that appear to match those recovered from the crime scene.
We found north of 50 expended projectiles in the dirt and sent those casings back to the laboratory for comparison.
After we compared the two casings together, one from the murder scene and one from the shooting range, the lab told us that they were fired from the same gun.
This is huge in an investigation. We have an identified suspect and we have physical evidence.
On January 30th, 2020, Josue Correa Vasquez is arrested for Omar's murder.
After Josue was arrested, we brought him in for an interview. We knew that the shell casings recovered at the crime scene were the same as the shooting range. What we didn't have was a way to tie that in to Josue. So what we decided to do was create a fake DNA profile that would be shown to Josue, and what it said was that we recovered DNA from the shell casings and that it matched somebody of the same age and ethnicity as Josue. The goal of having the DNA profile was in hopes that it would push Josue to tell the truth.
Detectives also use another tactic and make an emotional appeal.
Investigator Callanan actually had a photograph of Omar's children on his desk.
I showed him the kids and I said, these kids, they don't deserve what happened to them. Let's try to give them some closure.
They have no father. They just want answers. They want to know.
Josue stuns investigators with what he says next.
No importa, pero los niños sí. Ese día, como cuando ya el odio ya lo invade y ya siente este día lo voy a hacer.
There was a lot of hate against Omar for my part, and that's why me alone decided to kill him.
It was a monumental moment that we felt, okay, we've got the right guy.
The question remains, why would Josue commit such a heinous crime?
Josue told us he hated Omar. He hated that he would tell him how to do his job. He hated that he would be tough on him.
He felt that he was disrespected by Omar, and he was there to teach Omar a lesson.
Josue proceeds to tell investigators what happened that fatal night.
You knew that Omar was going to work at 2 in the morning?
Sí.
He said that he drove by Omar's residence a number of times, confirmed that the vehicle in the video surveillance was in fact his vehicle.
Y vuelta nada para ver si él estaba.
He says he went around the block to see if he was home.
Just before 2 a.m., Josue parked across the street from Omar's home, and he waited for him to come out.
Cuando ya lo vi que él venía saliendo, entonces iba rápido.
He saw Omar come out of his residence, and that was the moment that he'd been waiting for. He grabbed the AK-47. When Omar went to the driver's side of the door to leave, Josue emerged from the trees and yelled at him, "You don't look so invincible now, do you?" and described shooting him several times.
Eso fue lo que le dije, porque no era invencible. Que no era invencible.
He described the look in Omar's face, the surprise, the shock.
How many times did you shoot?
Era mucho el odio. Le disparé todo el cartucho. Como el tercer disparo ya cayó.
He seguiste disparando?
Sí.
And he kept firing.
Josue said that after he murdered Omar, he went home, he went to bed. A lot of Josue's interview is matter of fact, which was chilling in and of itself, that you can have murdered somebody and just be talking about it in such an unemotional way.
Josue admits that several days after killing Omar, he told his brother Eliud what he had done.
Eliud was concerned about the murder weapon and whether it could be traced back to Josue. So Eliud took it upon himself to take the AK-47 to the forest and bury it so no one would ever be able to find it.
Based on Josue's confession, Police bring in Eliud.
He eventually admitted to us that he did help dispose of the gun and gave us the details about where it was, and he pointed to the exact location where the firearm would be recovered.
So we dug right there and sure enough found an AK-47.
At this point, it's kind of a prosecutor's dream. We have a confession statement from the defendant, and the murder weapon that we never thought we would recover just showed up.
For his part in the crime, Eliud is sentenced to a year in jail.
Eliud was charged as being an accessory after the fact. He was charged for helping dispose of the murder weapon and not telling authorities about it.
On January 18th, 2022, Josue is sentenced to 2 life terms in prison for the murder of Omar Hernandez.
El día de la sentencia, sentí paz porque se estaba haciendo justicia de la muerte de Omar. Nunca imaginé que Josué hubiera hecho eso. Tan desgarrador, algo tan triste.
The biggest surprise was that it was somebody that you just never really would have expected. Omar had taken Josue under his wing. By all accounts, Omar cared very much about Josue.
That's what was so troubling in this case. Omar lost his life, was brutally murdered for no reason other than he was a hard-working individual who had expectations.
A mis hijos les quitó un padre y a mí la mitad de mi corazón. Eso nos arrancó Josué.
Omar's family still feels the deep impact.
It was a brand new model called the Boeing 737 MAX 8.
They didn't understand the danger that they were walking into.
Pull up. Pull up.
The plane had flown into the sea, at full speed.
The passengers would, of course, been hysterical. Computers, laptops, phones would have been flying around.
You can tell how violent that impact was.
People shouldn't innocently buy an airplane ticket and then be in a flying coffin.
Boeing had installed a flight control system on the 737 MAX that had the power to take control of the plane from the pilots without them even knowing about it.
They're turning the pages to find out what the hell it is.
Was given the power to try to kill them, essentially, until it finally succeeded.
Will passengers be willing to fly again on its troubled MAX plane?
346 people died. Can you answer a few questions here about that?
On a sunny March morning in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, a truly remarkable group of passengers converged on Bola International Airport. 149 passengers from 35 different countries around the world got ready to board Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, heading off to Nairobi.
It was seemingly just packed with people who are on goodwill missions of various kinds. There was a big environmental conference happening in Nairobi, a UN environmental conference.
Amongst the 149 passengers were also 9 Ethiopians, and one of them was Tamru Mulu, who is a child protection advocate.
He was a kind of person who's really passionate about life, especially children who are suffering from conflict, drought.
Also on that Ethiopian Airlines flight were 8 Americans, including 24-year-old Samia Stumo, who was raised on a Massachusetts farm by a family with a very strong tradition of activism. Samia had just started work for ThinkWell, which is a global healthcare organization.
This was her first assignment. She was going to East Africa. She, at 24, had impressed them that they sent her instead of someone, you know, a dozen years her senior.
But not everyone on that flight was on a goodwill mission. There were also two brothers from California, Melvin and Bennett Riffle, on one last adventure together because Melvin was about to become a new father.
Tell me how big this was for these two brothers to do this together. That was pretty remarkable.
I thought so. I mean,
No, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think it's rare that two brothers their age would stay close enough to want to travel with each other like that.
Also on Ethiopian Air 302 that morning, a young Russian couple on vacation, Alexander Polyakov and his wife, Ekaterina.
Они очень любили путешествовать. У них мечта была сразу. Но они перво-наперво, как они хотели именно поехать в этот национальный парк в Кению, чтобы увидеть крупных кошек.
And as they got ready to board, Ekaterina posted this cell phone video on Instagram of their plane outside that was waiting for them.
You know, in general, very few people think much about the model of the plane that they're on. You know, it's something that most people really don't think twice about.
In fact, it was a brand new model welcomed into the Ethiopian Airlines fleet with a lot of ceremony just months earlier called...
We are welcoming the state-of-the-art modern airplane, the 737 MAX 8.
It was a groundbreaking move for Ethiopian Airlines to acquire this aircraft. The fact that it was new, the fact that it uses the latest technology.
Boeing had had a track record of success, and you know, all expectations at the time were that the MAX would just be, you know, the next big thing for the company.
But it turns out this brand new plane had a secret, unknown even to the pilots. And when it was revealed, it would not just impact Boeing in shocking and unforeseen ways, but the entire air traveling community worldwide.
Boeing is an iconic American company. They're known as the king of the sky. This is a company that's at the heart of American engineering and American manufacturing.
For Captain Sully, celebrated for successfully landing his crippled plane on New York's Hudson River, Boeing has long been the gold standard for passenger aircraft.
Boeing had a century-long history of engineering excellence, an effective culture, good leadership.
There's a saying, and it stands today: if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. It's affirmation that Boeing has had our back for decades.
7 launches in 1958, and right off the bat, it is a huge success for Boeing. And it just so happens to be the same year that Frank Sinatra released
Desirable, and it was glamorous.
Air travel became, you know, sort of the vogue.
People would dress up to travel. Meals and flights were not a joke, you know, something that people might look forward to.
The 1960s were an extraordinary period for the company because of the 7 series of planes.
707 was the first successful jet. The 737 came.
And then they would do the 747, the so-called Queen of the Skies, the first jumbo jet. Boeing, from that point forward, was the premier maker of passenger aircraft.
By the 1980s, Boeing is unmatched in terms of its power, its reach, and those 700s planes are it.
I mean, the company was so important to our country's economy, you know, in part because it was the largest exporter in the world.
I mean, they manufacture Air Force One. I don't think you can get kind of any bigger than that.
But by the 1990s, Boeing started to face truly stiff competition from this European consortium called Airbus. But up until that point, Boeing hadn't really taken them all that seriously. But suddenly, they're up and coming.
They've really accelerated to become the only other, at this point, major global competitor to Boeing for commercial aircraft.
In late 2010, Airbus comes out with this new model that really shakes up the industry and puts serious pressure on Boeing to innovate.
The A320neo, a single-aisle aircraft that had new, more fuel-efficient engines that could fly farther and for cheaper.
People want to fly direct, and to do that, you need smaller, more efficient planes.
Boeing was focused on the wide-body world. Airbus beat them to the chase.
The A320neo. Damned if they didn't wind up becoming their fastest-selling airliner. And then Boeing's like, well, wait, what are we going to do?
Boeing comes up with what they think is this really smart plan. Instead of developing an entirely new plane to catch up with Airbus, they decide to take a shortcut and revamp a model that's already on the market, saving them a lot of extra time and money.
That's when they said, okay, we can take another look at the next iteration of 737.
There were new engines, larger, more fuel-efficient engines being added to this aircraft.
Boeing calls this new model the 737 MAX, and they promise they're going to fly more people, it'll cost less money, use less fuel, and cost a lot less to operate.
United Airlines says it has cut a new deal with Boeing to build 150 737s for its fleet over the next 10 years, giving the aircraft manufacturer a leg up against its main competitor, Airbus.
The Boeing 737 MAX was the fastest-selling airliner in Boeing history. Another ball out of the park for Boeing commercial aircraft.
You've got United and American and Southwest all lining up to buy it, along with 70 other buyers around the world.
One of the big customers early on was a young budget carrier in Indonesia called Lion Air. It was a huge deal.
Tonight's Money Matters, Boeing has finalized its biggest sale ever, a $22 billion order from Lion Air of Indonesia.
The 737 MAX 8 had been flying for 17 months without any incident, but then in October of 2018, suddenly, out of the blue, an alarming problem developed with one of Lion Air's brand new MAX planes.
They don't realize that there's something in it that could potentially be hazardous and something that pilots and co-pilots are not familiar with.
All of us are screaming like we are in a roller coaster. To be honest, I think this is my last flight and this is my last day. Is the capital, the largest city. The aviation industry was booming, especially with the increase of the middle class in Indonesia.
One of the airlines that benefited from that boom in air travel is Lion Air, an aggressive, rapidly growing budget Indonesian air carrier. In 2011, Lion Air made a huge splash buying more than 200 of Boeing's 737 MAX 8 planes.
Even the signing was overseen by then U.S. President Barack Obama.
So I want to congratulate Lion Air for their incredible success.
One of the Lion Air pilots chosen to fly the new 737 MAX was 31-year-old Bhavya Saneja. He's an Indian national whose dreams of being a pilot started when he was just a child.
So can you tell me about your son?
Yes, Bob, my son was a gifted child, a blessed child. I was into aviation, and for an aviator, when the child is flying and he becomes a commander, it is a big thing, you know, it is the sort of pinnacle of your dreams.
Even though her son had over 6,000 hours of flight experience, Sangeeta says she was really concerned after learning that he wouldn't be going through pilot simulator training for the MAX.
But I said, you haven't had a simulator training, how can you go for MAX? And it is a more powerful engine. So without a simulator, how will you manage?
One of the core selling points for Boeing of the 737 MAX was you don't need pilot training in the simulator.
They were selling this to airlines as essentially just another 737 that the airline pilots could fly without learning all that much new.
It's a huge deal to not have to have simulator training for pilots for any airline. It costs money and time. It takes the pilot off of the line and flying passengers around.
Lion Air had asked Boeing about simulator training for their pilots, and Boeing dissuaded them from this.
Now, according to internal Boeing documents, one of their employees ridiculed the request in a message to a colleague saying, now, Lion Air might need a sim to fly the MAX, and maybe because of their own stupidity, I'm scrambling, trying to figure out how to unscrew this now. Idiots.
Well, they were mocking them because if Lion Air required simulator training, then other airlines would say, well, wait a minute. If they're requiring it, maybe we need it. Then the whole house of cards would start to fall apart.
He said, Mom, I've been given ground training. They have given me a training on iPad. I said, what, an iPad?
So you would sit down with an iPad course, and I think there were 3 or 4 parts, and it went through a robotic voice describing what the MAX is about.
The 737 MAX has a 69-inch fan.
Did you see anything in it that looks, wow, that's substantial, we should probably do more training?
It seemed to be enough.
He trusted Boeing blindly, and that trust, you know, gave him immense confidence. He was empowered.
In October of 2018, Lion Air had a handful of the new 737 MAXes in its fleet, and one of the aircraft was going to be departing from Bali with the crew and passengers.
Me and my colleague in office, we went to Bali about October 2018. Bali is amazing for holiday, especially in Asia.
Lion Air flight JT043 was scheduled to take off from Bali to Jakarta.
The flight was quite full of passengers, and most of them are local or domestic tourists like me. It's around 7 or 10 minutes after the takeoff, the flight suddenly feels like a fall down.
It was a dive, a steep drop, 200 feet, and it wasn't something that was just caused by turbulence.
All of us are screaming like we are in a roller coaster.
How many times did it go up and down?
Up and down 4 times.
4 times?
Yes, the flight attendant who was sitting in the back, they could feel it up and down in extreme way.
When an aircraft is pitching aggressively downward like this aircraft was, and it may feel as if your stomach is coming up into your throat, basically, but then comes the positive G's. It'll squash you down into your seat.
To be honest, I think it's almost like this is my last flight and this is my last day.
It just so happened there was a third pilot traveling on the plane, and he steps in and helps them get control of the situation.
Until it's landed to the airport, I can hear everyone like say, so relief. Some of the passengers are Muslim. I can hear that say, Alhamdulillah, thanks God. I cannot say it in a word. It's really relief. Yeah, I still feel a little bit shaky until now about that.
The pilots were able to control it. They knew they had a problem, but they didn't understand exactly what the nature of the problem was.
After the flight successfully landed in Jakarta, the pilots logged that they'd had some issues, but they'd left a lot of gaps in understanding what had happened on that flight.
That left the next crew in the dark about potential problems with the aircraft.
The very next day, Captain Suneja is assigned to an early morning flight out of Jakarta on that same 737 MAX, but he was given an incomplete report about what happened to that plane the previous night.
These are 2 different flights, but the same exact plane. So it's something that spells disaster.
On the early morning of October 29, 2018, at the airport in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, Lion Air Flight 610 was getting ready to take off. Its destination was the city of Pangkal Pinang, which is located on the Indonesian island of Bangka.
There was 189 people on board, 181 passengers, 2 pilots, and 6 crew members.
One of the passengers was Miss Fiona Ayuzen. She was a businesswoman, 29 years old. She was flying back to Bangka for work.
Bawain kopi ya, Pak. Gitu. Karena saya suka kopi Bangka.
Pas pulang ke rumah, Mama bilang sekolah yang benar, terus dikasih uang jajan. Terus kalau besok paginya udah nggak ngeliat, soalnya udah berangkat duluan mamanya.
There was also another passenger by the name of Fendi Cristanto. He was flying to Bangka on a business trip and also on a personal trip. His father just passed away.
Karena dia mau mengikuti sembahyang bersama dengan keluarganya untuk sembahyang orang tuanya. Pulang mau ngikutin sembahyang yang ke-21 hari.
One of the passengers shot some video as they were boarding the flight. No one on board, including the pilots, had any idea that this very same plane suffered a near catastrophe in the air just the previous day. And on that video, you can see the brand new 737 MAX out the window.
Lion Air Flight 610 on that same 737 MAX is taking off from Jakarta. Very shortly after the flight takes off, the pilots are struggling with the plane.
The stick shaker pops off. It is loud and it is rattling in the captain's hands. There are a cacophony, a tidal wave of other distracting alerts. Airspeed disagree, altitude disagree.
Pull up, pull up. Just 10 minutes later, around 6:30 in the morning, a tugboat captain was out on the Java Sea, just east of Jakarta.
Saya merasakan ada sesuatu benda yang jatuh. Nah, di situ dalam hitungan detik terdengar dentuman cukup keras.
Apa itu?
Jadi saya menghubungi Jakarta Radio.
Iya,
itu telah terjadi pesawat jatuh.
The crash site, it is about 25 miles from Jakarta seaport. On my way to the crash site, really, I pray to God. I had great expectation that everybody still alive. Arriving on scene, when I saw the debris, the small pieces of fuselage, I lost my hope.
Kalau di dalam, kebanyakan itu hampir sama dengan yang ada di permukaan, karena yang ada di dasar laut, di kedalaman itu adalah potongan-potongan tubuh ataupun bagian-bagian pesawat, entah itu serpihan, kursi.
Presiden Direktur Lion Air Edward.
When news of the crash broke, I immediately flew in from Beijing, where I was based at the time. So the sun has just gone down, and you can see all the police officers along this dock. After arriving in Jakarta, our team headed out straight to the docks where the wreckage from the plane was being brought in. Whether it crashed or what happened, we still don't even know. But these crews have been pulling up and carrying out debris piece by piece. By the next day, the family members of the passengers were gathering and anxiously really waiting for word on whether their loved ones had survived the crash. Among the family members that I got the chance to talk to was the wife of that passenger who took that video of himself boarding onto the Lion airplane just minutes before it crashed. Your husband actually was taking video of the others getting on the plane when he got on?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you show that to us? Well, these are a lot of the other passengers that were on the plane?
Yeah.
Is there still some hope that there are survivors?
Yeah, we do believe that
and came apart with such force that there was no way anyone could have survived.
Berdoa buat cepet ketemu gitu. Berdoa biar tetap selamat, tapi nggak selamat gitu.
Karena benar-benar saya merasa kehilangan.
Hubungan antara Fiona dengan ibunya ini sangat dekat. Nah, begitu mendengar kecelakaan itu benar-benar down sekali. Benar-benar shock, down. Jadi 1 hari setelah pesawat jatuh, mendengar kabar ibu yang meninggal.
Fendi left behind a wife and 4 children, the youngest who was 5 years old.
Jujur ya Bu, suami saya itu kalau naik pesawat itu memang sangat khawatir. Dia itu paling takut kalau naik. Dengan rasa ketakutan yang dia.
737 MAX, it had only 800 flight hours.
But it turns out there was a hidden danger on that plane. A flight control system that Boeing did not even tell the pilots about.
There was nothing in the manuals that alerted the pilots to the existence of this new system that was placed on the MAX.
Pull up.
It has one mission, and that's to drive the nose down.
Terrain.
And it will not stop.
Pull up.
He was given the power to try to kill them, essentially, until it finally succeeded.
Pull up. Pull up.
Devastating plane. My first thoughts were, boy, it's a brand new airplane. It must have been bad maintenance, or it must have been pilot error.
A lot of Indonesians initially just saw that this was Lion Air fault.
ABC's David Curley has the story. Good morning, David.
George, the real thing that we need to find are those 2 black boxes, which will yield a lot of answers to all these questions.
The National Transport Safety Committee found the flight data record.
It becomes clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The pilots are struggling with the plane, almost in a tug of war.
When we found the black box, we found that the aircraft was pitching up and then down, down and up and down and up. It's up and down for about 24 times.
Had you ever seen anything quite like this?
I never knew any case of the aircraft can fly up and down like this. I knew that the pilot was fighting with the aircraft.
It would have been a terrifying roller coaster ride. During that time period, the passengers would have, of course, been hysterical. Things would have been flying in the cabin. Computers, laptops, phones would have been flying around. People would have been screaming.
It was a clear weather, so they could see the sea. And I think it will be very scary for everyone in the cabin to see outside, to feel the speed.
Sepuluh menit atau berapa itu? Rasa ketakutannya sangat amat.
Saya yakin saat itu dia sangat takut sekali, Bu, dengan pesawat yang goyang seperti itu. Saya bisa ngerasain juga.
When the cockpit recorder was eventually recovered, it was revealed that pilots were rifling through the pilot manual, trying to apparently figure out what to do.
They're turning the pages to find out what the hell it is, why the aircraft is going down.
They start shouting about which procedure should do. They knew that they were having serious problems, and they just screamed the name of God.
That point of time, that only pain he must have felt was the sense of failure, that he's not able to save others. Except that he was a brave child, you know.
We surprised. It's very strange that the aircraft doing that way. Then we asked Boeing what kind of system that may create this way.
What Boeing revealed to investigators came as a complete surprise. It turns out that Boeing had installed a flight control system on the 737 MAX that had the power to take control of the plane from the pilots without them even knowing about it. The program was called MCAS.
MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, and that this system, under certain circumstances, can trigger in such a way that it will cause the airplane to nose down.
Why did Boeing put this MCAS system? What was it for? It's a mystery not only for us, but also for the pilot and co-pilot on board the plane.
So the reason they put MCAS on the airplane was because they put these brand new huge engines on an old airframe.
In order to have sufficient ground clearance, they moved the engine further up above the leading edge of the wing and further forward, and that changed the way the airplane flew.
And this effect of the engines came in and the airplane starts to want to pitch up all by itself. The idea was to provide something that would offset that pitching moment or causing the nose to come up.
When the plane computers think the plane is in danger of a stall, so in very basic terms, MCAS pushes the plane's nose down by automatically triggering the rear horizontal stabilizer.
So the MCAS is there to correct what MCAS thinks is wrong.
Right.
The pilots have no idea why this plane is going down against their will,
Yes.
so they try to fight it back.
Yes. One of the most fundamental muscle memory things a pilot knows how to do. If the nose goes down too far, you pull it back and you trim. And this battle goes back and forth a couple of dozen times.
So it was MCAS, it was the computer against the pilot.
Yes, and the way MCAS was designed, it was given the control authority to do it as many times as necessary. In other words, it was given the power to try to kill them, essentially, until it finally succeeded.
Boeing's revelations about the MCAS system and what caused it to activate on the Lion Air flight in the first place would cause an uproar in the pilot community, and it would all lead to a secretly taped meeting where Boeing was recorded telling pilots that MCAS was being fixed.
Those are going to be relatively straightforward software changes that we expect to be done in a fairly short period of time. We want to make sure we're fixing the right things.
But while that was happening, the plane would continue to fly.
They were rolling the dice with the lives of the global traveling public.
Now that urgent safety warning from Boeing about their brand new 737 jets after that deadly crash in Indonesia. Now concerns about a feature that could malfunction, causing planes to abruptly dive.
A week after the Lion Air crash, Boeing issued a safety bulletin to the airlines, finally revealing the existence of a flight control system on the 737 MAX that could unexpectedly force the plane's nose down.
It's an admission by the company that there is a potential glitch in its newest aircraft.
Just a few days later, Boeing tells operators for the first time that there's a new and previously undisclosed system on the aircraft. And that is MCAS.
That was a shock. It's not in our manuals at all, except in one section, our abbreviation section. We didn't know what MCAS meant. It meant nothing to us.
But there was another critical question to be answered. What caused MCAS to force the nose of the Lion airplane down in the first place? The plane was flying normally, so why did MCAS activate?
Among a lot of surprises was that MCAS was triggered by a faulty angle of attack indicator, which is a relatively innocuous piece of equipment on the side of the airplane.
The angle of attack sensor was feeding incorrect data about the angle of the plane's nose.
It was telling the plane that it was, approaching a stall situation, that its nose was pitched up.
So the plane thought that the nose was angled too high, when in fact it wasn't.
And that MCAS needed to come in and push the nose back down.
And there was a further revelation about MCAS that took investigators by complete surprise. Even though there are 2 angle of attack sensors on the 737 MAX, MCAS only relied on one of them.
It's a lack of redundancy that appears to my mind to be unacceptable in airplane design, because the AOA indicator is susceptible to damage. It's not a robust piece of equipment.
A single point of failure hooked to a safety critical system, you just don't do that. It's crazy.
The bottom line here is the 737 MAX is safe, and the safety is a core value for us at Boeing.
Boeing CEO Dennis Muhlenberg went on Fox Business to reassure the public that a bulletin had been sent to all the airlines instructing pilots exactly what to do if there was another emergency situation involving the 737 MAX.
We've already issued a couple of additional bulletins that point them back to existing flight procedures to handle that kind of condition.
So Boeing is telling the pilots that one of their options is to simply turn off the power supply to the electric motor on the stabilizer. That's the, the piece that pivots up and down and controls the nose of the aircraft.
Boeing pointed out that the pilots on that previous Lion Air flight who overcame a mid-air emergency involving MCAS had followed the appropriate procedure by turning off power to the stabilizer. That was a step the pilots on the fatal flight did not take.
And that was perceived to be an indirect way of blaming the airline and blaming the pilots without also acknowledging design shortcomings of the system.
It emotionally tore me apart, as if I was blamed for him being the pilot. I was blamed for killing all the people, mothering a son who could not take care of his passengers.
Pilots were furious. Pilot unions asked Boeing, why didn't you tell us if you put something on the airplane that's going to actually interfere with my job?
Late November, about a month after the accident, 4 Boeing executives traveled to the headquarters of the Allied Pilots Association, the union that represents pilots at American Airlines.
That meeting was secretly recorded by the head of the pilots union.
Our president at the time wanted to make sure we knew exactly what was said.
We flat out deserve to know what is on our airplanes.
I don't disagree.
I don't know that understanding this system would have changed the outcome of this. We try not to overload the crews with information that's unnecessary so they actually know the information that we believe is important.
It enraged us. Boeing always gives you the information. They don't parcel it out.
We're working with the FAA right now to try to figure out what software changes we might make to eliminate the failure conditions that we experienced at Dateline here.
They said, well, we're going to correct the software, all the things that you brought up.
Those are going to be relatively straightforward software changes that we expect we can get out in a fairly short period of time. Weeks, not a year, but a couple, maybe 6 weeks-ish.
The question I have for you is, do you feel comfortable that the situation is under control today before any software fixes are implemented?
Absolutely.
They were taking a gamble with keeping that in the air. They had such a big bet on the 737 MAX. They had staked their reputation. They had staked their financial future on it.
4 months after that Lion Air crash, the 737 MAX is still flying all over the world. Meanwhile, 149 people are saying their goodbyes as they prepare to board that Ethiopian Airlines flight to Kenya. Among them, young Samia Stumo, who had just flown in from D.C. and was transiting to Nairobi for assignment with her global health care organization.
I guess she had landed in Ethiopia, and I said, safe travels, with a bunch of exclamation points, and she said, thanks, boo.
We didn't know that there was an issue with the plane. We thought that the problem that happened in it...
Maybe they didn't understand the danger that they were walking into.
Samia
Where are you? Where are you, Samia?
Boeing killed my daughter.
Pull up. We flat out deserve to know what is on our airplanes.
The nose is pointing down, and it's over.
Not a plane there. There was a hole in the ground.
The pilots have no idea why this plane is going down against their will.
Pilots were furious. Why didn't you tell us if you put something on the airplane that's going to actually interfere with my job?
What really shocks me is their greed. How they have the audacity to do what they're doing.
You're not the person anymore to solve the situation.
And they really should go to jail.
The Berkshires are in western Massachusetts, at the very far western end of the state, right up against the New York state line. The Stumos live in a town called Sheffield, and it's an absolutely lovely spot. It's quite a large farm and has this unbelievable view of the mountain range just to the west.
You can see the lower field. It's a cornfield.
How much land is there here?
180 acres.
Nadia Milleron and her husband Michael Stumo moved to this farm after a career as attorneys and advocates in Winston, Connecticut. That's also the home of the brother of Nadia's mom, perhaps the most famous consumer rights activist in American history.
The standard can be considered so inadequate that it is deemed illegal for the consumer interest.
Nadia's uncle was Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader became famous through his activism in Washington and his whole war on auto safety and all the rest.
I think he's had a big influence in both of our lives in terms of trying to make better things happen.
Nadia and Michael had 3 sons and 1 daughter who they named Samia.
She was a force of nature. She was just, oh gosh, she was, beautiful, intelligent, charismatic. She could just light up a room. But around here, she raised pigs. She would sell the meat to the neighbors. If she decided you needed to buy her pork, you were going to buy her pork.
Samia very much absorbed the family ethic, that you were supposed to use your time well, you develop your skills. She became very good at her instrument, which for her was cello. Watching Samia, you got the sense of someone who had really kind of brought together all these strains in the family, starting with Uncle Ralph in his activism, and then through her own parents.
Definitely he influenced Samia tremendously because she was out there at 9 years old campaigning for his presidential campaign. They made her cry. Your mother shouldn't allow you to be out here, and Ralph Nader is spoiling the election, and she understood the issues and she talked right back at them.
She had leadership written all over her. She had compassion in an intellectually rigorous way. Everybody loved her.
One pivotal moment in young Samia's life that fueled her drive to change the world was the tragic childhood death of her brother Nels.
He was diagnosed with cancer at 15, 16 months of age, and he ended up not making it. He died a little over 2 years old. We actually, we only have one picture with all 4 kids.
Did she ever tell you that part of her motivation and dream to get into medicine was because of what happened to Nels?
Yeah, she did. She believed that, her calling was healthcare, and I think that was partially a result of her exposure to her brother's illness.
Samia went to the University of Massachusetts and then managed to get a full-ride scholarship for the public health master's program at the University of Copenhagen.
Everybody liked her, but she was very firm in her beliefs. It really kind of forced you to think about what you said, think about what you believe, and defend it.
When I met Samia, I was really shy to talk to people. We just would go on these fun adventures. It just helped me be more fearless.
She had this knack of making you feel as fascinating as she was.
In January 2019, Samia had landed a dream job in Washington, D.C. with a global public health organization called ThinkWell.
Just a few months into her new job at ThinkWell, Samia gets her first assignment to go overseas. They were going to send her over to East Africa in March of 2019, where she was going to help set up some new offices.
This is the kind of thing that a relatively seasoned person is usually put into, and someone like Samia, without much experience in this, we were just so blown away by her that we felt that she had the acumen to be able to figure this out.
As Samia got ready for her Africa trip, perhaps the last plane, killing everyone on board.
And now we're going to turn to that.
A new flight control system Boeing had installed on the plane called MCAS.
Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. This system, under certain circumstances, can trigger in such a way that it will cause the airplane to nose down, independent of the pilot's judgment.
It turns out there was a defective sensor on that Lion airplane that accidentally triggered MCAS to activate and caused the plane to repeatedly go into a dive before it finally crashed.
After Lion Air, there was not a lot of urgency. I think it was sort of easy to dismiss it as a one-off. I would say it pretty quickly faded from view for the majority of the traveling public.
On March 10, 2019, Samia left D.C. for Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where she would be transferring to another plane on her way to her assignment in Kenya.
So there's 149 travelers from around the world, and they're about to get on the newest Boeing airliner, the 737 MAX. They have no idea of the danger.
On March 10, 2019, Samia Stumo had just arrived in the Ethiopian Addis Ababa after a long flight from Washington, D.C.
When I woke up, I just looked at the message and it said 2 more hours to Nairobi.
There were 149 passengers on that flight from 35 countries, most of them heading to Nairobi for a UN conference.
Also, at Gate 12 in Terminal 2, those two brothers from California, Melvin and Bennett Riffle, who were enjoying a globe-trotting jaunt together before the birth of Melvin's daughter.
When we said goodbye, he gave me a kiss and gave me a kiss on the stomach for Emma, you know, and he was all excited but nervous.
There were also this young Russian couple who posted a video on Instagram showing the 737 MAX, a brand new aircraft.
Unlike the pilots involved in that Indonesian crash, the Ethiopian Airlines pilots knew about Boeing's MCAS flight control system, and Boeing had actually sent a directive to airlines instructing pilots what to do if a plane went into a sudden dive on its own.
So Boeing is telling the pilots to turn off the power supply to the electric motor on the stabilizer. That's the, the piece that pivots up and down and controls the nose of the aircraft.
It was a bright Sunday morning. The plane took off at 8:30. And 3 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft started behaving erratically.
Their instruments start to show different readings.
After 6 minutes later, the plane was spotted again, about 30 miles from Addis in a small. Immediately drive to the Ethiopian Airlines compound. There were family members, people were crying, and some of them holding their head, and it was so horrifying to see them.
An hour earlier, something I talked to, and it just didn't feel right.
I don't know, I was trying to deny that it happened, or it's true, or somehow he has been spared.
We start in Ethiopia, where around 157 people are feared dead after a plane crashed early on Sunday.
Within, I think it was
2.5 hours or 3 hours, we were on a plane headed to Addis Ababa. This dirt road takes you to the field where that crash site is. So finally, after almost 3.5 hours that we arrive, a plane came down at such an enormous rate of speed, basically as fast as a cruise.
Ethiopian Airlines flight has crashed.
With victims from 35 different countries on board, grief resonates all around the world, including in a small seaside town in Russia.
Ну, просто очень обидно, когда такие дети на взлете, так сказать, и на взлете своей карьеры, на взлете всего погибают.
In the Northern California town of Redding, a phone rings in the Riffle home.
It was the embassy in Ethiopia. I said, I know why you're calling. Is it both boys? And they said it was.
It's something you can't believe when you hear it. It's like it's like you're in a nightmare or something, and it's just totally unbelievable.
It's one thing to lose one of your children, and you lost both.
Yeah. Lost our family, and we had help Brittany.
I said, please don't tell me my husband's dead. And Susan said, both of them. And I just collapsed. What do I do now? I'm pregnant. What do I do? Our baby. What? What do I do now?
And word of the terrible crash also travels to a family farm nestled in the Berkshires in Massachusetts.
I turned on the BBC. It said that a plane had crashed. I remember I couldn't breathe. Then I woke up Michael, and he told me, what are you talking about? That's impossible. That's what he told me.
Can't be true.
My sister is not going to die in a crash. It doesn't fit into your world. And we thought, oh, well, maybe she survived. We needed to get to Ethiopia right away to help her. We had to be there. And we had to protect her.
We got in the car, and we headed for JFK. Got on the flight, and along the way, along our journey, we learned that there were no survivors.
There was not a plane there. There was a hole in the ground.
Data now in the hands of Ethiopian officials.
As the investigation continued in the cause of the crash, there was a question on many people's minds. Would Boeing 737 MAX
has the same thing happen
next day? And it didn't take long for investigators to conclude.
Angle of attack sensor triggered the activation of
The first officer saying, pitch up, pitch up, pitch up, while the MCAS was kicking and nosediving the aircraft. It was so difficult for them to keep the aircraft under control.
Despite similarities between the two crashes, this time there was a huge difference. Not only the Ethiopian Airlines pilots knew about MCAS, they also followed Boeing's instruction on how to disable it.
The crew performed all the procedures repeatedly provided by the manufacturer, but was not able to control the aircraft.
This was actually pretty shocking because Boeing had been suggesting that overcoming an erroneous MCAS activation was pretty straightforward. If that was the case, why did this second accident happen?
To better understand why those pilots could not recover control of the plane, we asked two experienced American Airlines pilots and members of the Allied Pilots Association to take us through what might have occurred in that Ethiopian Airlines cockpit based on information from the black boxes. So in here, what will we see?
In this airplane, while it is not a MAX, the displays are very similar, but what's unique about the MAX in this case is the MCAS.
I'll be kind of simulating the MCAS with my electric trim switch to show what the MCAS would be doing.
So now we're going to take off from the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, heading to Kenya.
Yep.
Shortly after the takeoff, faulty data from the plane's angle of attack sensor triggers a myriad of false alerts in that cockpit.
Seconds after you take off.
Altitude disagree, airspeed disagree.
Aircraft, the stick shaker is shaking continuously, very loud. This will not stop throughout the entire flight.
In the middle of all these distractions, MCAS suddenly activates.
MCAS is firing. Starts to push the nose down. I'm pulling back. And then I trim up, get a little bit of trim up on it. And the MCAS kicks in again. The MCAS is more powerful and fast than what the pilot can do. So it'll always win more.
It was at this point that the Ethiopian Airlines pilots followed Boeing's instructions and cut off electronic power to the stabilizer in the plane's tail. So you realize that MCAS is not working.
But the problem now is that the nose is so far down, they're having trouble
holding it back, yeah.
MCAS had left the plane in such a precarious position that the pilots did not have the physical strength to manually pull it out of that deep dive.
Now the stick is getting very, very heavy. So the captain says, pull with me, which is basically saying, help me. I've got a lot of weight on this, but I have no trim to do it. I go, okay, manual trim.
Okay, and I'm trying, but it's not working.
I can't hold it back.
Unable to control the plane manually, in a last-ditch effort, the Ethiopian pilots decided to turn the electronic stabilizer system back on.
The MCAS fires, and this fire goes and goes. I'm pulling back, a little bit of trip. And now the nose is pointing down and it's over. Stop the sim. They're headed toward the ground. They turn those switches back on, which is not in a checklist, but welcome to the battlefield. You're staring at the ground and you don't know what else to do.
Do you ever think about what goes through the mind and the heart of pilots when the plane is going down?
Yes, I don't like to think about that. I think that's everyone's worst nightmare.
It's hard. But they fought. They fought. They did what pilots do.
The system let them down. The system let them down.
Unlike with Lion Air, the Ethiopian air crash has sudden and swift repercussions for Boeing. Ethiopian Air immediately grounds their entire MAX fleet, and like a domino effect, countries around the world start grounding their fleets.
All of us at Boeing are deeply sorry for the loss of life in the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 and Lion Air Flight 610 accidents.
Boeing was saying that they were working on adding safeguards to MCAS to make a safe airplane even safer.
Would the accident have happened without MCAS, though? You call it a link.
It's a chain of events, right? There is no singular item. It's a chain of events.
But what you came up with in the end was flawed, was it not?
We've designed the MAX to have the flying qualities that were desired in the hands of the pilots. The MCAS system.
They will not easily admit their wrongdoing, even where it is very evident. And that was the case with Boeing at that particular time.
346 people died. Can you answer a few questions here about that?
He's sorry that we lost our family members. He doesn't take any accountability for having caused their deaths.
If Boeing thought that Nadia and Michael and the other victims' families were going to just quietly go away and not try to hold the company accountable, they could not have been more wrong.
It was amazing to behold these two people from this farm in western Massachusetts coming down to take on really one of the biggest corporations in the world.
Mr. Stumo, thank you for your presence today.
Boeing killed my daughter. We're not afraid of anybody.
In the fall of 2019, and they actually included some artifacts.
We got back Samia's business journal, which talks about her plans. We got back her passport. This is a business blouse that she took with her, and it all smells of jet fuel. They fill the room with the smell. I mean, to me, it's a smell of death.
I don't want other mothers and other families to go through this. I don't want them to be trying to hear their daughter's voice and, wonder what you would say to them. So that's why it's important to work on aviation safety. Because people shouldn't innocently buy an airplane ticket and then be in a flying coffin.
While Nadia and her husband Michael were consumed by grief, they were able to quickly turn their anguish into action against Boeing.
The family of Samia Stumo shares their pain so that others don't feel the same.
Michael and Nadia fly to Chicago and file the first lawsuit against Boeing by an American family.
I want her death not to be in vain. I don't want anybody else to die.
Nadia and Michael, along with more than 100 other families of victims around the world, alleged that Max had a defective design and that Boeing issued inadequate warnings about the plane, something that Boeing denies.
This is going to go down as one of the most callous, deliberate efforts to keep a product in the public domain for the wrong reasons.
What really shocks me is their greed. I don't know how they can still, sleep at night.
But there was a second front in Nadia and Michael's battle against Boeing. They and the other families were determined to take part in the congressional hearings into what went wrong with the 737 MAX and make sure that another crash never happened again.
We have 3 generations of farm advocacy in my family, and Nadia, of course, has, Ralph Nader and her family and that advocacy.
People should not fly this plane if it's ungrounded.
My uncle said to us practical things.
To never settle for staff, always go for the top.
I feel like it's cruel irony. Samia's family knew how to do it because it's a very complicated system to navigate, and it's a fight.
Nadia has really been, I think, a principal support for many of the other families out there, while Michael is pursuing the more, what's the fix and what went wrong.
As we go forward, this committee will leave no stone unturned.
We kept saying you can't just have the bureaucrats and the engineers and the pilots. It's all about the families.
Today, I speak not only with my voice, but the voices of my departed family.
Paul Girogi testified.
And he had lost his entire family.
I think about the last 6 minutes a lot. My wife and my mom-in-law knew they were going to die. They had to somehow comfort the children during those final moments, knowing they were all their last. I wish I was there with them.
At the congressional hearings, there was some talk that foreign pilots failed to respond appropriately.
For me, the accident report reaffirms my belief that pilots trained in the United States would have successfully been able to handle this situation.
Chair now recognizes Captain Chelsea B. Sullenberger III.
That claim was called out after the dramatic appearance of perhaps the most famous pilot in America, Chesley Sullenberger.
I'm one of a relatively small group of people who have experienced such a crisis and lived to share what we learned about it.
Sully was the miracle on the Hudson pilot. He successfully landed his plane on New York's Hudson River after a bird strike crippled his engines. Captain Sullenberger became a national hero, immortalized by Tom Hanks in the movie Sully.
Like many pilots, I was disappointed that many were blaming the dead crews of the accident flights. I've got to tell you from personal, first-hand experience how real and how intense the startle factor is.
I recently experienced all these warnings in a 737 MAX flight simulator during recreations of the accident flights. Even knowing what was going to happen, I could see how crews could have run out of time before they could have solved the problems.
Boeing, built into their design of MCAS sort of an assumption that pilots would be able to react to something going wrong within 4 seconds.
Well, think about that. Let's start the clock. Now. 2, 3. That's it. It's just really unlikely almost any airline crew would have acted effectively that fast. These accidents should never have happened, and I'm really distressed that they happened.
But the investigation into Boeing would go much deeper, raising questions about whether Boeing knew about problems with the MAX before they put it in the air.
The information coming out of the investigation is shocking.
And it would all lead to a face-to-face confrontation between a grieving mother from a farm and the head of one of the most powerful companies in the world.
And I want to, confront a situation, but I want to say it to you directly because I don't think you understand what we're saying.
The things that are coming out of the investigation are shocking about what Boeing knew and what it was saying internally.
House investigation concluded that the safety of the flying public was put into jeopardy by Boeing's pressure to compete with Airbus.
The committee uncovered emails and communications showing that there had been lower-level employees who raised questions several times about MCAS.
In an internal email, a Boeing engineer wrote about that problem that triggered MCAS in both plane crashes, saying, "Are we vulnerable to single sensor failures with the MCAS implementation?" This is back in 2015, asking about the vulnerability of these particular devices.
Yeah, I mean, they're setting my daughter up to die in 2019. I mean, these are questions of life and death, but that's not how they treated them in the company.
House investigators released documents they had obtained from inside Boeing showing that their own training pilots had a very dismissive attitude towards regulators and customers.
One Boeing employee who emerged as a central figure in the investigation was Chief Technical Pilot Mark Fortner, who became well known in the media after his emails became public.
Mark Fortner was the one who asked regulators whether they could remove any mention of MCAS from the flight crew operations manual. Fortner, in some of the emails and instant messages, was kind of gloating at his ability to, as he said, Jedi mind trick regulators.
In fact, it was Fortner who wrote that instant message to a colleague, mocking Lion Air for their stupidity in requesting simulator training, referring to them as idiots.
His emails were shocking, but they're just the tip of the iceberg of the failure of the safety culture at Boeing.
Some Boeing employees openly questioned the safety culture of the company during development of the 737 MAX. In one email, a worker said, "This airplane is designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys." Another Boeing employee wrote, "Frankly, right now all my internal warning bells are going off, and for the first time in my life, I'm sorry to say that I'm hesitant about putting my family on a Boeing airplane."
The safety culture was eviscerated under production pressure.
Meanwhile, Nadia, Michael, and the other families have another battle to fight. And that's with the Federal Aviation Administration, which certified the 737 MAX as safe and allowed it to fly even after the first crash.
One of the most explosive discoveries came from within the Federal Aviation Administration. And remember, the FAA's sole job is to ensure the safety of the traveling public.
After the Lion Air accident, the FAA had done an analysis, that indicated that if nothing was changed, that there might be, 15 accidents over the course of the next decades while the MAX was in use. And, that would make it, the deadliest commercial airliner, ever.
We stood out there in front of the FAA with our sign.
Her life was just cut short. That was caused by complicity with Boeing.
For the first time, and on tonight's one-year anniversary of the first 737 MAX crash, Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg faced Congress.
For Nadia, Michael, and the other families, the person they really wanted answers from was the man in charge of Boeing.
When Dennis Muilenburg comes to Washington to testify, it's a really big moment.
I've met with the families. They keep faces of their loved ones in people's minds. They're not going to be forgotten.
I too would like to acknowledge the families that are here with us today. And again, wanted to tell you I'm sorry. We are deeply, deeply sorry. And we'll never forget.
He was just saying words for the camera. They never tried to reach the families personally.
Who bears the principal responsibility at Boeing for the cascading events that resulted in the crash of Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302?
Mr. Chairman, my company and I are responsible. We're responsible for our airplanes. And we know there are things we need to improve. I'd grown up on a farm in Iowa. My parents taught me the value of hard work and integrity.
To do the aw shucks Iowa farm boy thing, I'm an Iowa farm boy. It doesn't cut it with me, and it was grating.
Mr. Mollenberg has a question, as I probably won't get to ask it another time. Where you talked about Iowa just like one too many times, and the whole group said, go back to the farm. Go back to Iowa. Do that. You're not the person anymore to solve the situation. But I want to say it to you directly, because I don't think you understand what we're saying.
I respect that. I really do. In the end, it's about safety. And
Even if you're not capable of doing that.
I respect your inputs there. I just tell you, we are very focused on safety, and you have...
I wanted to pierce through to the human being. Imagine being in our shoes.
Just a couple months after the House hearing, Muhlenberg was forced out as CEO of Boeing.
But while Muhlenberg may be gone, the clouds of suspicion over Boeing remain.
And the Justice Department is investigating, and hopefully some people are going to go to jail.
But after losing billions because of the MAX scandal, Boeing's commercial future may hinge on one question: will passengers be willing to fly again on its troubled MAX?
The Justice Department has launched a criminal investigation into the plane's development.
The government opened a criminal probe. The investigation is focused on whether Boeing withheld information from regulators.
The Justice Department would not talk to us about the criminal investigation, but sources have told 2020 that at this point, agents are looking hard at one former Boeing employee in particular.
Prosecutors at the Department of Justice were focusing on building a case involving Mark Faulkner, the former chief technical pilot for the 737 MAX.
Faulkner's attorney did not respond to our repeated requests for comment, but has stated in the past that as a pilot and Air Force vet, he would never jeopardize the safety of other pilots or their passengers.
He was part of the culture of concealment, but it certainly does not end with him. There's a lot of people much higher up in the food chain in Boeing who were involved in this.
They really should go to jail. I mean, people who are responsible for decisions which kill other human beings should be personally responsible.
But the ongoing criminal investigation is one of just many problems facing Boeing right now. Their reputation is in tatters.
At this point, Boeing is looking feverishly for any success.
Getting the MAX flying is still at the top of their list.
Boeing has made a number of changes to its MAX plane. MCAS will now rely on both sensors. It'll only activate once. Pilots will also be required to complete flight simulator training. And in a statement to 2020, Boeing said it had made a series of meaningful changes to strengthen our company's safety practices and culture.
Cleared for travel. That was the message from the Federal Aviation Administration to Boeing for its 737 MAX.
One of the longest aircraft groundings in history is over.
I am 100% comfortable with my family flying on it.
After a 20-month grounding, just last week, the FAA approved the Boeing 737 MAX to return to the skies.
And on its website, American Airlines advertises the first MAX flight from Miami to New York City on December 29th.
I do think the 737 is a safe airplane. I have no issue about that. But this MCAS thing was bad. I think that trust is going to be really hard to get back at this point.
Neither of us would ever get on the 737 MAX, and we will warn every single person we know to make sure that they don't fly on a 737 MAX.
Mr. Stumo, thank you for your presence today.
Meanwhile, this summer, Michael testified about reforming the FAA certification process, which, under federal rules, allows aircraft manufacturers to largely oversee the testing and development of planes themselves.
The FAA's core vision appears to be to reduce its direct involvement in certification.
It was like the fox guarding the chicken coop. When you have Boeing certifying Boeing, hello, what do you expect out of that?
System is not broken. However, all processes need to be improved really each and every day.
The FAA did not respond to 2020's request for an interview to discuss the issues surrounding the 737 MAX. After the hearing, Nadia and Michael briefed victims' families from around the world on a Zoom meeting.
Thank you, really, Michael, for what you just said.
We have a role to play. You or anybody has a role to play as a victim.
She's been a great advocate for the families, her and her husband, Michael. No, I can't thank them enough.
I know the sun is in your eyes.
On the other side of the country, in Redding, California, Melvin Riffle's daughter was born just 2 months after he was killed in the Ethiopian air crash. Melvin had picked out a name for his then unborn daughter, Emma.
So over here, I would like Emma to remember Melvin by. This is actually his passport. This is the only thing that I got off the plane. Look, Emma, who is that? That Daddy? Yeah, it is on.
This is Samia's room. I can't believe that this is remained untouched for more than a year. I look for Samia all the time. I call Samia. Sometimes I'm in the house by myself. I just shout, Samia, Samia, where are you? Where are you, Samia? But Boeing took her, and I wish I could trade places with her. She deserved to live, and the world deserved to have Samia. I know she would want her family to fight that other people not die.
Sammy just wants people that are wrong to be righted.
To his religious life. For the past 5 years, he's been a member of a small church in New Jersey. Every morning, Tim has the same routine. Before starting his day at the New Jersey Unemployment Office, he wakes up at 5 a.m. and goes to the church's 7 a.m. prayer meeting.
He came home one weekend and said that he had joined a church, and we were glad. We grew up in church, so we thought that was good.
We stressed the fact that religion was an important part of our lives. We believe in God. We went to church every Sunday. I taught Sunday school. Tim was in my class as well as his sisters. So we were happy that religion was still a part of his life.
Tim joins the Gospel Outreach Church, led by Pastor Jim Lethbridge, and soon has a new circle of friends. His sister Megan would come to question the group's appeal.
I think Tim joined Gospel Outreach because they posed themselves as a Christian study group, people that were on his wavelength, you know, really focused on academics.
He didn't say too much, just that he was going to church and we were just happy to hear that, so we left it at that.
Tim surrounds himself primarily with Gospel Outreach members and has been living with fellow congregants since college.
He felt very comfortable there. He felt wanted and loved, and he felt at home.
While Tim had excelled in academics growing up, his bookish nature made it difficult for him to make friends when he was younger.
He was the smart kid, so people shy away from smart kids. He would be talking to adults at 12 years old because nobody else understood him. He was made fun of a lot. He just wanted to feel like he belonged to something, a group.
It was hard. It was very hard because we know he's got a great sense of humor. He's a great kid. They just got to get to know him.
Tim's passion for books eventually inspired him to write his own stories.
Tim started writing at a young age. Because he loved reading so much, it was just natural for him to just try to create his own adventures in writing.
Tim had particularly enjoyed mysteries.
His favorite was Edgar Allan Poe, and he liked to write with the surprise endings. In his briefcase, he had writing. He was writing a book.
Tim was pretty secretive with his writings. Once he felt like something was perfect, then he would share it. But before then, he was pretty protective of his writings, and he would keep them in like a briefcase.
Tim could never have known then that his own life would one day become the center of a troubling mystery. On September 28, 2004, an average Tuesday, Tim's day begins as usual. According to his roommate Roy, also a member of Gospel Outreach, Tim wakes at 5 a.m. to go to the 7 a.m. prayer meeting. But on this day, Tim's morning unfolds differently from his normal routine. His fellow church members report that Tim never arrives at morning prayers. Even before his disappearance, Tim's family is uncomfortable with the way Tim makes church activities the central focus of his life.
Whereas before he would come down and join us for church on Sunday as a family. Now, if he did come down, he had to leave right away to get back to the group. It was more about, you know, I got to get to Bible study, or I have to get to men's group, or I have to get to choir. It was mandatory for him to attend.
Family members worry that Tim's religious commitment is pulling him away from them.
Well, there was a big change in Tim. He didn't come around as often. He was very secretive. He wouldn't communicate with us. And that was tough, because before that, we always had a good communication.
It was just really out of character for him, just not like him, to miss the family function or to not call. And it was happening more and more frequently. I didn't like what was happening. I didn't like that he couldn't be with us.
Every time he had to go somewhere, he couldn't go by himself. When my sister was in the hospital, he would come down to see her, but he always had somebody else with him. And they made a statement once where it's like, well, we wanted to make sure there was a real Aunt Kathleen.
Phyllis Carney sensed a pressure on Tim to distance himself from his family.
I think they don't want you to talk to anybody else outside the group, because they always said, well, don't tell anybody about us because they won't understand.
Rick Ross is consulted nationwide by families and law enforcement. He has made a career studying religious groups, including Gospel Outreach and Pastor Lethbridge.
In my experience, the families that have loved ones in Gospel Outreach have very limited communication. When a group isolates members, they do that in order to create a kind of bubble. If they can control everything that goes into the mind, they can control the mind itself. So by isolating people from family members, they create an environment in where what the group wants them to think and feel is constantly being reinforced.
I think they were telling them, we're your family now. You don't need your family, we're your family. Well, churches bring people together, they don't tear them apart.
Tim's family notices that his devotion to Gospel Outreach and to the teachings of Pastor Lethbridge seems to have a physical effect.
He changed his appearance. He always had short hair in college. And one summer when he came home, he had long hair and he had a ponytail. We didn't think much of it. Actually, it looked good on him. But then one Sunday, we went and sat in on a church service. And lo and behold, the minister happens to have long hair and a ponytail. And so do several other male members of the group.
But then one day he came home with short hair and surprised me. Then we saw Lethbridge right after that, and Lethbridge had cut his hair.
Gradually, Tim's parents begin to see Gospel Outreach as very different from the kind of church in which the Carneys had grown up.
We had gotten a phone call from parents who have a son in the group also. And they had some concerns about the church and they wanted to talk to us about it. That's when everything kind of fell into place. Things that we joked about, we thought was kind of funny, but once we started talking to these people, it wasn't funny anymore. It was serious. We know he's a smart boy, and we didn't think he'd be sucked into a group that would influence him like they did.
In 2003, the year before Tim disappears, his ties to gospel outreach grow even stronger when he begins seeing a woman who is also a member of the congregation.
He came home and said he was courting. That's the word they used. I said, well, what kind of word is courting? I wasn't, you know, they don't use that word anymore. That's such an old-fashioned term that was a little strange too, I thought.
Tim's family was bewildered by his dating rituals.
They could sit next to one another, but they couldn't hold hands. If they wanted to hold hands, they had to hold a fork. She held the fork halfway, and then he would grab a fork the rest of the way. And that was their way of being with one another. They couldn't touch.
At Tim's college graduation party, his sister Megan noticed that some members of gospel outreach seemed to have more conservative customs than other couples she knew.
There was 3 people watching TV, and the couple that was supposed to have been together weren't sitting next to each other on the couch. There was somebody in between them. It seemed like none of the girls could ever be alone with their significant others. There always had to be like a person watching to make sure that they were following the rules.
When his parents bring up what they perceive as the church's strict doctrines, it becomes a source of tension in the family.
We try to avoid talking about the church because then that only goes into an argument, and then we start yelling at one another.
He was constantly trying to prove to us that it was a legitimate group, or it was a good group, or that there was nothing wrong, that everything was fine and happy. I think part of that is that he wouldn't want my mother or my father to worry. But part of that is almost as if maybe deep down he knew that some of the things that they were doing weren't how we were raised or how we grew up.
All the Carneys knew of gospel outreach was what they heard from Tim, that it was a Christian fellowship devoted to studying the Bible. Despite his family's concerns about the strict lifestyle that gospel outreach seems to require, Phyllis Carney sees Tim's relationship having a positive impact on her son.
Oh, he seemed very happy. He really did. He seemed very, very happy with her. I mean, he brought her to the family Christmas party. If he's happy, then you're happy.
But about 7 months after Tim's relationship begins, the Carneys learned some disappointing news.
One day he just came and said they had broken up, and that's all he would say. Looked like he was upset about it, but he wouldn't talk about it. And that was it.
On Saturday, September 25th, 2004, 5 months after Tim's breakup, he and his sisters Erin and Megan have dinner at their childhood home to celebrate their parents' anniversary.
We just had a nice night, family-wise. We didn't talk about the church at all.
He didn't leave early. He stayed, and he had dinner with us, and we watched a movie after, and it was like the old Tim. Being in the moment, just being with the family, just having a good time.
The last thing he did was hug me and say, "Mom, I love you." And then he left and went home.
The next day, Sunday, Megan gets together with Tim, but their time is cut short.
We were supposed to go to lunch, but I canceled because I wasn't in a good mood.
Megan sees a potential clue she may have missed, looking back on that day.
He was trying hard to convince me to go out to eat, try to, you know, get together, and I didn't. I didn't go. And it feels awful. I hate so much that I wasn't in a good mood. He wasn't always so insistent to meet for lunch. Like, if we get together, we get together. You know, if we don't, we'll just reschedule, no big deal. But I always wonder if he was trying to tell me something, or maybe warn us about something that was happening that we didn't know about. I always wonder about that.
Tim's request to meet for lunch would echo in Megan's mind. Just 2 days later, on Tuesday, September 28th, Tim never shows up at morning prayers and disappears. Coming up, when police find a clue, Tim's family fears the worst.
We thought foul play.
25-year-old Tim Carney spends the evening with his family at his parents' home in Edison, New Jersey. As he leaves, Tim hugs his mom goodbye and says he'll see her next week. The following Tuesday, September 28th, Tim gets up at 5 a.m. as usual to go to the Gospel Outreach 7 a.m. morning prayers. But Tim never appears. By 9 a.m., when Tim doesn't show up at the unemployment office where he works as a claims examiner, his coworkers assume Tim is just late. According to his colleagues, this had become common, especially since his breakup. Then, just after 9 a.m., Tim calls his supervisor to say he'll be late. But by 10 a.m., Tim hasn't arrived. Calls to his home and cell phones only reach his voicemail. The next day, the Carneys get a call every parent dreads.
His roommate Roy called and wanted to know if Tim was at our house because he didn't come home that night. Well, no, he's not here.
We called his cell phone and it just rang. No one picked up.
Alarmed, Phyllis and Ed Carney file a missing persons report with the police in Butler, New Jersey, where Tim lives. When detectives search his home, they find no indication that Tim was leaving for longer than just a normal workday. Detective Colleen Pascal is on the team investigating Tim's case.
Nothing was taken out of his home of importance. If he, again, intended to go away for long, he did not take any of his belongings. His room was intact. His clothes were still there.
Police discover Tim took something with him that at the time seemed normal for him to bring to work, along with his wallet, keys, and cell phone.
We understand that he took the silver briefcase. It's believed that there were writings in that briefcase, which is something that he always carries.
According to investigators, after Tim calls his supervisor around 9 that morning, all outbound activity from his cell phone stops. On Wednesday, September 29th, the day after Tim vanishes, a clue appears.
We received information that somebody had found a wallet.
A patron at the Lyndhurst Diner spots Tim's wallet in the eatery's parking lot. The restaurant is on Route 23, halfway between Tim's apartment and his office. Police learn from the diner's employees that someone matching Tim's description used to eat breakfast there often. Unfortunately, by the time police received the tip about Tim's wallet, it has already been sitting at the diner for several days.
When the wallet was found, they called the phone number that was in his wallet, and his roommate obtained the message, but the message didn't get to the police that day. The police didn't find out about the wallet for quite some time. They could have questioned people a lot sooner instead of quite a few days after.
Police canvass the area around the diner, but find no leads. The wallet still contains Tim's credit cards, leading police to believe this was not a robbery. What's missing also doesn't suggest foul play to Al Schumann, a private investigator hired by the Carney family 6 months after Tim disappears.
Curiously, what was missing from the wallet was nothing except his driver's license and his college identification card.
Since nothing valuable is missing from Tim's wallet, investigators now reason that he may have left it there himself. If so, they need to find out why. Because Tim is an adult, his case centers on one concern. Did he vanish of his own free will, or has he been abducted?
If he chose to be missing on his own, if he just left and did not want to be found, then that in itself is not a crime. He's not a child. He doesn't have to report to his parents where he is.
Three days after Tim vanishes, there's a new development. In Newark, about 35 miles from Tim's home, construction workers discover an abandoned car. When police respond to the scene, they determine that the car belongs to Tim Carney.
When they found his car, we thought foul play. So we were very worried at this point that something terrible had happened to Tim, because they thought, well, maybe they found his body there also. And they said, no, it's just a car. There's no sign of Tim.
Once again, the investigation takes an unfortunate turn. By the time police get the call, it has been almost a week that Tim's car has been at the construction site.
That's where the city of Newark and the city of Elizabeth meet. No one was notified right away about the car because each township felt it was the other township's issue. So it had gone quite a few days without anybody contacting the police regarding it to even notice that, wow, that car belonged to somebody who was declared missing.
The construction site sits on a dirt road off the main highway. It's virtually unreachable by foot.
We didn't know what to think because, like, well, if his car's there, then how did he get out of the spot? It's in a remote spot. It was very far to walk to anywhere.
Investigators find little that indicates what may have happened to him.
It had been raining, and so any clues that there were there, whether it's footprints or whatever, were washed away.
No forensics other than his was retained from the vehicle. There was no sign of struggle. No evidence led any of the investigator officers to believe that there was foul play. It appears that the vehicle was just abandoned.
But detectives do notice one thing notably missing from Tim's car.
He always had this briefcase with him, and they didn't find it.
Since police find no sign of foul play from Tim's wallet or car, and the briefcase that had always been by his side is now missing, detectives believe that Tim may have disappeared intentionally. The discovery of Tim's car gives Tim's loved ones some hope, while also raising some unsettling questions.
Why would he ditch the car? I mean, all kinds of thoughts go through your head. It's like, did he get hurt? Did he walk somewhere? What's the next step? Where do you go? Where should we go look? Any bit of hope, you go running to it. You have hope that you'll find him.
Even though the car itself doesn't provide any leads, investigators do find one important clue. The construction site is right by Newark International Airport. Coming up, Tim's family suspects he may be in trouble.
He would never go this long without calling somebody and saying, I'm okay.
After he disappears on Saturday, September 28th, 2004. Tim's wallet is spotted in a parking lot the next day. Then, police find his car in a remote location about 35 miles from his home. There are no signs of foul play, but they do notice that his briefcase is missing. His briefcase, containing his writing, was the one item Tim was known to always keep with him. Since Tim's car is abandoned near Newark International Airport, police reason he may have boarded a flight. Tim's father, Ed Carney, believes that his son could have headed to Canada.
We thought he might have gone to Canada because he knows people in Canada. He speaks French fluently. He had 7 years of it in school.
At the time of Tim's disappearance, a driver's license was sufficient travel documentation for U.S. citizens to enter Canada. Since Tim's driver's license was missing from his wallet, it's possible he could have crossed the border. Phyllis Carney believes her son may have been looking for a way out of what they saw as the restrictive life he led as a member of the Gospel Outreach Church.
If Tim was going to leave the church, I don't think he would have told us. And so I think he might have thought in order to leave the church, this was the way to do it. The pressure might have just gotten to him.
Initially, Tim's family wants to believe their only son will soon return.
We thought maybe he's got to clear his head and then we'll see him again.
But as the days stretch on, the Carneys also find something troubling in Tim's disappearance. Even if he left of his own free will, they wonder if something may have happened to him.
I just know my brother enough to know that he would never do this to my parents. I mean, we're a pretty close family. He would never go this long without calling somebody in our family and saying, I'm okay.
Ed Carney speaks to Pastor Jim Lethbridge soon after Tim goes missing. Just days later, members of his church and Lethbridge leave for a weekend retreat.
And he told me when they come back, he'll give me the full support of him and the church and looking for Tim. I thought it was odd that they all decided to go away for a weekend and not help me find Tim.
Rick Ross has seen this response to a disappearance with other religious groups.
When there's a group and it's very small, like the Lethbridge group, which has just a handful of members really, and someone important like Tim Carney leaves, who everyone regarded as at one time a loyal and devoted member, it creates doubts in the group. So in order to get a handle on that, a leader may sequester the group and go into a kind of retreat where he or she can then spin the departure of the valued group member for damage control.
Once Gospel Outreach members return from the retreat, the Carneys hope for their support in the search effort.
I specifically called Pastor Lethbridge to request his assistance, and he just was unavailable. He couldn't be bothered.
They might have known if he was depressed. He was with them more than he was with us. Any one of them could have helped us, but nobody talked to us, nobody called. And that's more disappointing than anything, that nobody wanted to help us.
After private investigator Al Schumann also reaches out to Gospel Outreach members, he says he gets minimal cooperation.
The church members were reluctant to speak. As a matter of fact, they were very curt and abrupt in response.
Then, Ed and Phyllis Carney speak to other parents of Gospel Outreach members. They report learning that Tim's congregation has a very different understanding of his disappearance.
And I was shocked to find out that they're told that Tim's okay.
According to the Carneys, Jim Lethbridge has given his congregation a disturbing account of Tim's disappearance, that Tim is not missing at all, and that his parents know his whereabouts.
He told them we kidnapped our own son.
He just feels that my parents have done something with him and that, you know, we're hiding him. We're certainly not hiding him. We're trying to bring him home.
Still pursuing the theory that Tim might have boarded a plane, investigators examine travel manifests in the hope of finding Tim's name on a flight out of Newark. Their search comes up empty, as do Al Schumann's inquiries with Canadian authorities.
I contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They said that at that point, border patrols had tightened to the point where they were almost certain that he could not have gone into Canada from the United States without being detected.
But investigators realize that Tim could have found a way to make himself nearly invisible to anyone trying to track him. The search for Tim Carney might be targeting the wrong person.
He could have assumed a new identity due to his employment.
Tim's position at the state unemployment office put dozens of Social Security numbers within his reach, giving him the ability to create an entirely new identity. If Tim did assume another identity, it would be virtually impossible to track him among the thousands of passengers who travel daily through Newark Airport. Phyllis Carney suspects that with a new identity, Tim could easily avoid detection.
He's a very average-looking guy. I mean, he doesn't have blue hair.
Is it possible that Tim, the amateur mystery writer, could have created the ultimate whodunit?
It's like it's a mystery novel without the ending.
Coming up, Tim may be closer to home than his family realizes. Gone missing. According to his family, he may have wanted to escape his life in the Gospel Outreach Church, a congregation the Carneys saw as isolating and controlling. Tim's family hears that Gospel Outreach pastor Jim Lethbridge has told his members that Tim has not disappeared at all, and that his parents know where he is. Since Tim had access to countless Social Security numbers through his job at the unemployment office, investigators consider the possibility that he could be traveling under a different identity. Police get a lead that heats up the local search again. Since his disappearance, investigators have been monitoring Tim's bank account and credit cards. For 3 days, the accounts have shown no activity. But suddenly, on the 4th day after Tim goes missing, bank surveillance images reveal a man accessing Tim's checking account.
On October 2nd, there was an image taken of a male party withdrawing money from his account. He's wearing a baseball cap. The baseball cap was pulled down very low over his eyes so that you could not see who the individual was. Clearly, the individual is trying to hide themselves from the camera.
The bank is located about 7 miles from the construction site where Tim's car is found abandoned, and about 24 miles from his usual branch. The man in the surveillance image hands the teller a withdrawal slip in the amount of $1,000, just $100 short of the entire balance in Tim's account. When police interview the bank teller, she reports a curious observation. The person making the transaction had a red, splotchy rash all over his hands.
I knew it was him. He had psoriasis starting in high school. I could tell it was him. I could tell it by his hands.
According to his parents, Tim's psoriasis tended to flare up at specific times.
Stress plays a role in it, so that would be something that would tell us that it was Tim.
Detectives showed the bank teller photos of Tim, and she identifies him as the man who made the withdrawal. Upon inspecting the withdrawal slip, police discovered that it includes Tim's driver's license number as proof of ID. The evidence confirms investigators' belief that it was Tim making the transaction. When authorities checked the bank's surveillance images, there is nothing that suggests Tim was being forced to make the withdrawal.
The individual who was there did not appear to be under duress.
But Tim's sister Megan isn't convinced that the man believed to be Tim was acting alone.
There was no parking lot shots to see if he was by himself or with somebody else.
Without his car, it would have taken Tim over 2 hours to walk from the construction site near Newark Airport to the bank. Investigators believe someone may be driving him around. But the question remains, even if Tim is with someone, is he in trouble? Authorities examine Tim's financial history for clues to his disappearance. What they find surprises even those closest to him. Tim had approximately $20,000 in credit card debt, a huge sum for anyone, particularly a civil servant making around $35,000 per year.
He did not have a lavish lifestyle. He lived in a local apartment complex. He drove a basic car.
Oh, we figured he was doing okay. He's got a decent job. He's making a living. He was making ends meet.
Tim was the last person his family would expect to be in debt.
My brother was always good at saving. If he wanted a computer, my parents wouldn't buy it for him. He was always really good about saving to get whatever he wanted. He always had money. He always had some type of emergency fund.
But when authorities investigate his work life, they learn that Tim often borrowed money from his coworkers.
Sometimes he didn't even have the 70 cents tolls to go home with. You know, he'd have to borrow that. He'd borrow money for lunch.
Tim's family suspects that his involvement with gospel outreach may have been a factor in Tim's large debt.
When he joined gospel outreach, we started to notice that he didn't have as much money as he did before.
According to police, gospel outreach informed them that as a nonprofit organization, it collects annual dues that total about 10% of each member's yearly income. The Carneys believe Tim may have felt pressured to give gospel outreach more than just 10%.
He was giving a lot to the church. He got a part-time job also on top of his full-time job.
We didn't realize the income that he had, it just wasn't enough to live on after all that he was giving to the church.
I do believe that he may have had to pay using credit card debt and things like that to remain a part of this congregation.
According to Tim's family, the impact of his contributions to the church was evident.
I just remember a conversation with my mother and my brother. My mother telling him that, you know, he needed new shoes. And I remember my brother getting upset and telling her that you're expected to give 10% or more than 10%. 10% seemed to be the minimum that they were expected to give to gospel outreach and Pastor Lethbridge.
Still, investigators have no way of knowing whether finances, church-related or otherwise, play any role in Tim's disappearance. With no new information, the search for Tim Carney begins to look bleak.
What makes it disturbing is you have a whole lot of questions. But we don't really have any answers, nor do we have a way to find those answers because there are no leads.
Coming up, witnesses say they've seen Tim. But is it him? And is he in danger?
He seemed very tense and very nervous.
"25-year-old Tim Carney has always loved mystery novels. And after vanishing on September 28, 2004, some evidence suggests that Tim may have written himself into a mystery of his own creation. Police find Tim's wallet and car within 1 week of his disappearance. They establish that neither the wallet nor his car show signs of foul play. Then, a man looking like Tim appears on bank surveillance footage, withdrawing nearly all the money in Tim's checking account. With hopes that Tim might still be nearby, the Carney family works tirelessly to find him.
I was passing out flyers, various businesses and restaurants along Route 23, the corridor where Tim would drive his car to and from work.
About 3 weeks after Tim disappears, the flyers pay off. On October 21st, police receive a call from employees at the Terminal 1 bar. It's about a 10-minute drive from Newark Airport and the construction site where Tim's car was abandoned. They report that somebody matching Tim's description has been seen at the bar in recent weeks. Ignacio Pinto, the owner of Terminal 1 bar, remembers the man on the flyer specifically for what he didn't do.
He never consumed any alcohol, which is one of the reasons that it stood out to me. I mean, being the owner, I'm looking for people to always be drinking. He drank water every time.
Apparently, he also drew attention for being an unusually reserved bar patron.
What I remember about him the most is really the look in his eyes. Like he had a lot of inner turmoil and he had a lot of stuff that he was just, you know, in his mind that he was thinking about. I mean, most people come to a bar, they come to sort of, you know, let loose, and he was anything but that. His look, his energy was saying, leave me alone. He seemed very tense and very nervous.
If this was Tim, he didn't seem to be a man on the run.
He didn't look like somebody that was homeless. He was fairly well dressed. He wasn't dirty in any way, but he was always dressed the same. A pair of slacks and a buttoned shirt. Sort of office wear. Looking back now, I think he was just killing time more so than anything. I think he probably didn't have any other place to go to, and this was sort of a place for him to spend some time.
Ignacio recalls clearly the last time the Terminal 1 bar had a visit from the man he identifies from the flyer.
We had a problem with him, which I believe was the last time that we saw him here.
After keeping to himself for about 2 weeks, the normally quiet customer shows a sudden change in attitude toward a female bartender when he accuses her of stealing his wallet.
He caused a ruckus because the bartender said, you know, look, you gonna buy a drink or not? And then he accused the bartender of stealing his wallet and just making a scene at the bar.
My bartender wanted him thrown out because he was rude. It said something that was inappropriate, and he tried to reach and grab her. We just asked him to leave. He left. He didn't really put up a fight. He just took off. And we never saw him after that.
The report of this incident leaves the Carney family concerned about Tim.
He's not a confrontational person. He didn't like fighting with his sister. He didn't like fighting with anyone.
That's not the Tim that we know. I don't know if he was doing that to bring attention to himself, that he wanted to be found.
With the unusual sightings of Tim, the Carneys considered the frightening thought that perhaps he might not be able to find his way home.
We were thinking at that point he might have hit his head. Maybe he didn't know who he was. We went everywhere we could think of because if something did happen and he didn't know who he was, I'm sure your whole personality changes.
The Carneys continue their search, hoping Tim might still be within reach.
We gathered a team, and every day, every night, There were teams working on different things. One team would go out to homeless shelters or hospitals or supermarkets to put up flyers, and others would go to just local businesses and just people on the street.
Ed Carney believes that despite Tim's education and intellectual strengths, he would be no match for a life on the streets.
He's not streetwise. He would be taken advantage of so easily. If he had to live on the streets, I just don't see him surviving.
2 weeks after Tim Carney vanishes, his family must face a sad reality. Tim is really gone.
We went to go clean out his apartment because his lease, it was up. I think it was particularly difficult for my parents. My sister and I kept having to reassure them that everything would be okay. It was just stuff. It really didn't matter. What mattered is finding him and bringing him home, not how many shirts he had in his closet or what was on his coffee table.
10 months pass before a new development emerges in Tim's case. When private investigator Al Schumann is canvassing the area around the Terminal 1 bar, he uncovers a lead. Employees at a deli near the bar say they spotted Tim 2 to 3 months earlier, in the spring after his disappearance.
That particular deli was a real find. They definitely identified him by his photographs. He frequented that place 2 or 3 times.
The man usually bought a soda. It's another purchase that makes Al confident this could be Tim.
He bought a phone card, which would explain no further cell phone calls from or to anyone.
However, further searches of the area come up empty. The investigation hits a wall.
Unfortunately, there are so many variables of what could have happened to him, although I think that he has chosen his own destiny. And that is why we do not have any lead information to find him. Being a mother, I imagine it is probably one of the most difficult things that this family has had to deal with, not knowing what happened to their son. One way or the other, the family needs some type of closure to move on with their own lives.
Since the week of Tim's disappearance that autumn in 2004, the Carneys never hear from Pastor Lethbridge or any other members of Gospel Outreach. Still, upon investigation, detectives find no connection between Gospel Outreach and Tim's disappearance. Both Pastor Lethbridge and Gospel Outreach have denied that their congregation practices excessive control or financial impropriety.
None of their actions are a crime. Our investigation never led us to believe that any part of the congregation was party to Mr. Carney being missing. In itself, being part of a religious group is not a crime. What they teach is not a crime, and people have a right to choose what they want to believe in.
As the weeks turn into months and then years, Tim's family hopes he is still safe somewhere, but wrestle with the possibility that they may never see their would-be writer son again.
Never did we dream that it would be going on 6 years.